Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk about one of the most disturbing and painful chapters in recent history, a brutal massacre in Iran where thousands of lives were lost, stories were silenced, and a nation was left traumatized. This is not an easy topic, but it is an important one because remembering is the first step toward understanding and accountability. What happened did not occur overnight. It was the result of years of tension, fear, anger, and unresolved conflict between the people and those in power. When frustration builds for too long, it eventually reaches a breaking point, and in Iran that breaking point came with devastating consequences. Protests began as expressions of public anger. People from different backgrounds took to the streets demanding dignity, justice, and basic rights. These were not armed movements at first. They were voices, slogans, and gatherings fueled by desperation and hope. The response was swift and merciless. Security forces moved in with overwhelming force. Streets that once echoed with chants quickly filled with gunfire, screams, and chaos. What should have been a moment for dialogue turned into a bloodbath. Eyewitnesses described scenes of panic. People running in every direction, trying to escape bullets and batons. Some fell to the ground and never got back up. Others were dragged away, injured or unconscious, their fate unknown. Hospitals became overcrowded. Doctors and nurses worked non-stop, often under surveillance and pressure. Many injured protesters were afraid to seek medical help, knowing that doing so could lead to arrest or worse. Families searched desperately for their loved ones. Parents went from police station to police station, morgue to morgue, holding photos and asking questions that were met with silence or threats. For many, there were no answers, only grief. The number of those killed quickly rose into the thousands. Exact figures remained disputed, partly because information was tightly controlled. Internet shutdowns and media blackouts made it difficult for the outside world to see what was happening in real time. This silence was not accidental. Cutting communication meant isolating the population and preventing evidence from spreading. In the darkness of that isolation, violence continued largely unseen. Those who survived carried deep scars. Physical injuries were only part of the damage. Psychological trauma settled in, leaving people with nightmares, fear, and a sense of helplessness that lingers long after the streets grew quiet. Detentions followed the killings. Thousands were arrested, including students, workers, journalists, and activists. Many were held without charge. Reports of torture, forced confessions, and abuse began to surface. Families were often pressured not to speak publicly. Funerals were monitored. Mourning itself became an act of resistance. Even tears were treated as threats. The massacre sent shockwaves through Iranian society. Trust, already fragile, was shattered further. People realized that expressing dissent could cost them their lives. International reactions came, but for many they felt insufficient. Statements of concern and condemnation were issued, yet concrete action seemed slow and limited. For victims and their families, words offered little comfort. The event also revealed how power can be maintained through fear. When a state chooses violence over dialogue, it sends a clear message about whose lives are valued and whose are expendable. History shows that such moments do not simply disappear. They leave marks that resurface again and again. Each anniversary reopens wounds. Each mention brings back memories that never fully fade. For younger generations, this massacre became a defining lesson. It shaped how they see authority, justice, and the cost of speaking out. Many grew up faster than they should have, learning harsh truths early in life. At the same time, acts of courage emerged. Despite the danger, some people documented events, hid the injured, and helped families find information. These quiet acts of humanity stood in stark contrast to the brutality surrounding them. The cultural impact was profound. Art, music, and poetry began to reflect loss and resistance. Even when censored, messages found subtle ways to survive and spread. Economically, the aftermath added pressure to an already struggling population. Sanctions, instability, and fear combined to make daily life harder for ordinary citizens who had already paid a terrible price. The massacre also raised difficult moral questions. What responsibility does the international community have when such large-scale violence occurs? How should justice be pursued when those responsible remain in power? For many Iranians, justice feels distant. Courts are not independent, and accountability is rare. This absence of justice deepens the pain, turning grief into long-term resentment. Yet memory itself can be powerful. By remembering, people resist erasure. By telling stories, they challenge official narratives that attempt to minimize or deny what happened. This is why discussions like this matter. Silence benefits only those who wish to escape responsibility. Speaking, even years later, keeps the truth alive. It is important to understand that behind every statistic is a human being. Each number represents a life with dreams, relationships, and a future that was cut short. Parents lost children, children lost parents, friends lost friends. Entire communities were altered forever by a few days of extreme violence. Fear still hangs in the air for many. Even now, people weigh every word they speak, every message they send, knowing how quickly things can turn deadly. The massacre did not solve the problems that led to the protests. Instead, it deepened them. Economic hardship, political repression, and social inequality did not disappear with the gunfire. In many ways, it created a cycle. Violence breeds anger, anger leads to resistance, and resistance is met with more violence. Breaking this cycle requires courage and change, not force. Some former officials and insiders later hinted at regret, but regret without accountability offers little healing. True reconciliation requires truth and responsibility. Outside Iran, diaspora communities continue to mourn and advocate. They organize, protest, and speak to media, trying to ensure that the world does not forget. For them, distance does not lessen the pain. In some ways, it intensifies it because they watch from afar, unable to protect their loved ones. The massacre stands as a warning. When power goes unchecked and dissent is criminalized, violence becomes a tool of control rather than a last resort. It also stands as a testament to resilience. Despite everything, many Iranians continue to hope for a future where such events are no longer possible. Education, awareness, and international pressure remain key. Change is slow, but history shows that even the most rigid systems can eventually transform. Remembering the victims is not about reopening wounds for the sake of pain. It is about honoring lives and learning lessons that might prevent future tragedies. As viewers and listeners, engaging with this topic carries responsibility. It asks us to question narratives, seek truth, and empathize beyond borders. The brutal massacre in Iran is not just an Iranian story. It is a human story about what happens when voices are crushed and lives are treated as expendable. Thousands were killed, but millions were affected. The impact rippled through families, communities, and generations. As time passes, there may be attempts to rewrite or erase this chapter. That is why continued discussion matters more than ever. History is shaped not only by those who act, but also by those who remember. By keeping these stories alive, we push back against silence. The hope remains that one day accountability will come, that those responsible will face justice, and that healing can truly begin. Until then, remembrance is a form of resistance. Speaking the truth is an act of solidarity with those who can no longer speak for themselves. This tragedy reminds us of the value of human life and the danger of unchecked power, it urges us to stay informed, compassionate, and vigilant. Thank you for taking the time to listen and reflect. Remembering the past is painful, but forgetting it would be far worse.